My name is Stacy Une, and I am a staff attorney with Advocates for Justice and Education. AJE is the federally designated Parent Training Information Center, as well as the DC Parent Center. And our mission is to empower parents and students to advocate for children and students affected. I've been doing this work for approximately 7 years in the district, representing hundreds of families in IEP meetings and other proceedings. So the purpose of this video today is how to prepare for an IEP meeting. IEP is Individualized Education Program, and it is the primary important document in all special education matters federally. So some of the things in this video I will talk about are DC related, and I will do my best to specify where it's specifically DC, but otherwise the Individuals with Disability Education Act, which is the special education federal law that controls and mandates most of the special education regulations across the country, is something that applies nationally. So in terms of preparing for an IEP meeting, my goal is to make parents be more comfortable and more confident walking into these meetings. For that, I have 3 IEP meeting preparation stages that I want to review. The first one is making sure, do you have all the information you require? The second is knowing who to expect and what to expect once you get into the room. And the third is creating your own agenda. The first is making sure that you have all of the information that you need, which includes your child's educational records. So for most people, that involves making a request in advance in writing to the school and requesting all of the students' educational records, which includes behavioral records, report cards, standardized test results, as well as some records that exist that are not traditionally sent to parents. For example, a service tracker record or a service provider tracking record is something that a counselor or a speech language therapist would have to create, but it's not a record that schools are traditionally sending parents unless they're asked for. So my recommendation is to clearly request all of your child's educational records, your cumulative records, prior to an IEP meeting, and to gather your own. So that's number one, is making sure you have all the information available and the record. The second important stage of preparing for an IEP meeting is knowing who's going to be there and whether the school has their own agenda. So in DC, there is a law that provides that schools are supposed to provide parents with all records that are relevant to an IEP meeting at least 5 business days in advance. But in my experience, if you do not ask in advance, you will probably not get these documents. So it's really important to ask in advance. Who called the meeting? Did the school call the meeting? Do you know the purpose of the meeting? Is it an annual IEP meeting review? Is it to discuss a recent disciplinary incident? In order to find out, the easiest way is to ask. So send an email to your child's school saying, hi, I know this IEP meeting is coming up. Who can I expect to be there? And what can I expect to discuss? Is there an agenda? Will the school be proposing anything? Are there any documents that I can look at in advance? Especially now with distance learning and IEPs, meetings, most of which are being handled over Zoom or over the phone. It's incredibly important to have those documents in advance so that you can be a meaningful participant at the table. Remember that parents can always call their own IEP meetings at any time if they have concerns that they require for the entire IEP meeting to address. So the IEP members are somewhat dictated by law. You can expect the special education coordinator, the local educational agency representative, a person who can interpret results, a teacher, a general education teacher, and a special education teacher. But again, it can always just be helpful to ask the school who's going to attend the meeting. The third important part of preparing for an IEP meeting is making sure that you have your own agenda written down, parental priority. The reason for this is that in IEP meetings, there's a lot of members and time is of the essence. You're dealing with a working document, the IEP, and an IEP meeting can either involve changing the document or not changing the document. So a lot of times you may want to get something accomplished, but you need to make sure that the document's actually changing when you do it. For that reason, having a plan written down is extremely important. Also, so that you can participate in the meeting and pay attention to what others are saying. So in this video, I'm going to introduce a sample template that is going to hopefully assist you in making your own agenda and priorities before you even walk into the meeting. So that when you're in the meeting, you can refer to the document and make sure and know confidently I'm not forgetting something, and these are the most important points and questions and takeaways that I need to express before the meeting is over. As a resource, AJE is going to provide parents with a copy of parent meeting and template that I've created after doing this work for several years. It'll be available on our website, and you can see a copy of it in this video. And I'm going to be going through the document and talking to you about how I use the document and how it might be useful to you in terms of preparing for your child's IEP meeting. Primarily, the document is a resource where it provides guided note-taking. So it's supposed to track how an IEP meeting goes and prompt you to take the notes that you may want to have later for your own record. For example, just the people who attended the meeting, getting their name, getting their role, writing down if somebody left during the meeting or if you were asked to waive a teacher's presence. That can be really important when you're going back and thinking about, or if you ever have to testify about what happened in a meeting. It can start either with the school or with the parents' concerns. I always say just because we come in with an agenda, it doesn't mean we're leading the meeting. It is still the school's meeting to lead. The document is centrally focused on, after you've prepared, what are your asks for the team? What, if any, changes do you want made to your child's identification, evaluation, or placement that require documented changes on the IEP, so that you didn't just spend the last hour and a half talking around things that could happen or might happen, but you've actually made a written change or a structural change in the IEP or in your child's program, meaning changing hours or changing providers or changing services, and you want that documented. The IEP is similar to, you can think of it like a contract between you and the school about what your child is going to get, and it's a constantly working in progress document that can always be updated and can always be changed by convening the IEP team, having a meeting. So coming up with your asks is really important. And we're going to go through this today with a parent to see how you can take a concern and go through an analysis of, if I were to bring this up in an IEP meeting, how would I do it? Should I bring this up in an IEP meeting? And what would it look like to make changes on the IEP that actually reflect the changes that I want to see from my child? Thank you for joining us, Lark, Advocates for Justice and Education's parent organizer. Thank you for agreeing to play the role of the parent today so that we can do a mock consultation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Why don't you tell me some of your concerns about Michael and what your goals are for Michael's education?
Yeah, so when school started being distant learning, my child started having problems with his writing class and was very unengaged with the teacher in the classroom altogether. And obviously his grades went down. I had to reach out, and the teachers were reaching out to me trying to get him to be more involved and writing more. And it's just been a struggle since then. Luckily he did pass. I'm just really worried what will the next school year look like, because things weren't in place and he doesn't have a diagnosis at the moment. I'm suspecting he has autism, but I really would like him to get evaluated. There will be more systems in place. He won't continue struggling.
Okay. He doesn't have a diagnosis, but he does have an IEP already, right?
Yes. So that he got tested for a learning disability.
He has an IEP for a learning disability. What would you say is your primary goal for Michael's education right now?
Just like stronger outlines of what needs to be done to make sure that he won't continue failing in his classes or nearly failing in his classes. So on page 2, under the asks, what does number 1 mean?
Okay, so based on evaluations, data, information, and your own observations, you're asking for the following: that the school develop an IEP for the student identifying blank as their primary disability classification, making note of any other conditions or diagnosis. So that would be if you had concerns, for example, you shared that you suspected your child may have autism in addition to learning disability he has an IEP for. Once the evaluation is complete, if the school agrees to evaluate, or if you were to go out into your own doctor and insurance and to come back with a diagnosis for autism, That would require the school to review the information that you brought or that they created in their report and potentially go through an eligibility classification to see whether your child meets the criteria for autism spectrum disorder in the IEP context. And the result of that could be changing potentially their classification from learning disability to autism spectrum disorder, or potentially a multiple disabilities if one is not more primary than the other. In this case, the step would be the evaluation comes first, and then the conversation about identification would come.
So what if they say that he does not need to be evaluated?
Okay, that's a good question. So sometimes the school is not going to agree with you. I think it's important to lay out some of your reasons why you think he might have autism. So what are a couple of things to you, you're the expert on your child, that make you think that Michael might have autism?
He has inappropriate behavior sometimes when we're trying to be serious. He wants to play a lot. He just takes social cues very oddly. And I have another child, and I've kind of seen certain benchmarks and behaviors very different between the two of them. So I've just been researching a lot, and he just seems to really fit the autism spectrum to me. But I think also because he's high functioning, people want to dismiss my suspicions a lot of the time because it's not classical, I guess, looking in the eye.
So when you're asking the school to consider doing an evaluation, it is important kind of earlier in the meeting agenda to highlight talking points about why. So you already said you've done the research. You know that social cues and eye contact and sometimes inappropriate behaviors, what other mothers may deem inappropriate social behaviors, are all potentially symptoms. I would highlight those in the beginning. I recommend highlighting them just as they are. Feel free to share if you looked at a checklist that you found online, how many of the symptoms you've seen, the fact that he's been tested before, but the school could very well say no. What you want is to get a clear yes or a no. And that's important because then you can preserve your right to dispute. So like I said before, the law has a requirement where the school has to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability. And the parent plays a very important role in the IEP team meeting because they are the expert on their child. So for the school to reject testing a child for autism does put you in a difficult position, but you can establish a record to make it so that it can be easier to challenge afterwards. And what I would recommend is requesting a prior written notice if they say no, in order to force them to write down why they're saying no to you. And that could leave you with a couple options later, potentially requesting an independent evaluation, going outside of school and getting your own, or contesting through the special education dispute resolution mechanisms like a due process hearing and challenging them to pay for the evaluation that you requested. If they do decide to wait, you should know that they're going to be required to get your consent. So you'll know if they agreed to formally assess because they'll need you to sign a consent to evaluate form. And that consent form should say specifically what the test is.
That's good to know. What does number 2 about inside and outside and with the minutes and hours per week? What is that all about?
So number 2, which says that the student's IEP should reflect their need for specialized instruction inside or outside the general education setting, is about your child's service hours. And the key distinction between an IEP and a 504 plan is that students with IEPs have specialized instruction, which specialized instruction means any alteration in the method, delivery, or content of instruction. So perhaps your child's receiving modified work packets, or the delivery in which the parent or the teacher is supposed to talk to the child is specialized. And in most cases, there is a special education teacher who is licensed and who is supposed to be providing those services that is doing that. So in an IEP, what that looks like is everything in your goals. Those are what the special education teacher works on. But the service hours are how many hours they are paid and contractually required to be with your child. So in your case, you talked about increasing Michael's service hours in the class of writing and in the area of writing outside the general education setting because describing the environment. To increase it on the inside would be to have a co-teacher or a special education teacher coming into the same classroom size he's been in and offering additional support such as prompting, checking with him for understanding, modifying work, etc.
So, since we're living in a virtual world, I would ideally be asking for one-on-ones with the teacher and not the necessary. Well, I mean, I still want him to be in the regular classroom, but I think he also just needs like extra help one-on-one. So that would be technically the outside, right?
I would definitely consult with the team about what the options are, but remember that there's something in between what you said, like there's different options. So it doesn't just have to be him in a class of 15 people and him with one teacher. So there's hybrid models where you could have some hours he's receiving in the class, and then perhaps for the last half an hour, he's going into a smaller classroom where he is getting one-on-one time with the teacher. An individualized education program is supposed to be individualized to your child's needs. So it's a balance, but in general, it's not what does the school have to offer my child, but what does my child need, and arguing from that point of view.
What does related services mean for question 3?
So if you were to form an ask in the related services section, that's similar to where the service hours are located. It's actually located on the same page of the IEP. And a related service is any service that is required to help a child access special education. So for example, transportation is a related service. Speech language services
Really?
is a related service. And behavior support services is another way that they call like social support or counseling. You mentioned that Michael's been having some difficulty engaging. You may want to talk to the school about what kind of behavior support services are available. And that is certainly something that should be written into his IEP, because then you can hold the school accountable because it's added to your IEP contract so that you can know whether he's getting it. The other benefit is when he starts to get behavior support services, the school is required to track his progress by using something called service provider tracker records, which are something you can request from the school. And it should have summaries of the date and time your child met with the provider, how many people were involved, and what goals they specifically worked on.
So you're saying my son could see a therapist at his school?
Absolutely.
That could be an option?
That is a related service available on the IEP, and it's certainly something, if you're interested in, you should ask at the next IEP meeting. And again, make sure you get your yes or your no from the school in terms of whether they're going to agree to it at the end of the meeting.
That's so helpful. Thank you. For question 4, that school agreed to evaluate my performance of the following assessment. What does that mean?
You talked a little bit about how you thought Michael may have autism and you suspected that. An assessment can be in any area. We're talking about formal evaluations and assessments. So standardized tests with national protocols is typically what we're talking about. So for example, a psychological assessment is the kind of base assessment where they look at your cognitive ability, your child's academic achievement, perhaps their social emotional behavioral, and there is an observation component. For most parents with kids with IEPs, they've already had at least one of those in terms of establishing their eligibility. For this, you want to specifically be asking the people around the table, what kind of assessment do you need to do and can you do to figure out if my child has autism and to rule it out? So there is the ADOS, there is GARS. These are acronyms for specific scientific assessments to rule out autism. And you really want to be talking with the child's team to make sure that you're sure and they're sure that all the sub-assessments and assessments that are being done are sufficient to evaluate your child in every area of disability, but also to come up with a plan that is appropriate and addresses all your child's needs. So you could be asking, for example, making sure that the person who's doing the assessment looks into whether they recommend therapy or they recommend behavioral support services, if it's something that you're questioning, you can definitely ask the school to give you their opinion on that. Once the evaluation's over, the school is required to review it with you. So just consenting to an evaluation doesn't mean you're changing or you're consenting to a change in your child service plan. It works, we get an assessment, and then 45 to 60 days later, hopefully less, you'll get the results of the assessment, be able to review the written report prior to the IEP meeting, which means you need to be proactive in requesting it. And then you have an opportunity to renegotiate what's in the IEP.
Thank you. This is very, very helpful. If for some reason things don't go my way in any of these asks that I have, how can I get more assistance from AJE?
So the important part of this document as a resource for you is to be able to take accurate notes about what happened in the meeting, in particular for the parts that are highlighted on the form and in response to your ask. So in the section F on the form that I've given you, it talks about like what you should be thinking of at the end of the meeting. So you want to find out if the school is willing to agree or disagree with your request or consider it. There have been times where even though a school has not told us right at the meeting, they have asked for a grace period of 3 days so that they can get back to us. That's totally up to you. Sometimes I agree, even though the parent's supposed to be at the table. If the school's protocol is that they want to consult someone else before telling you no, well, that would be a whole lot quicker to be resolved than a 3-month due process hearing. So sometimes it's your choice whether you want to give them that time. But if there has been a dispute, you definitely want to assert your right and request a prior written notice so that you get something in writing from the school, locking down their reasons why they disagreed. That's your right as a parent. You definitely want to request the meeting notes, which you have a right to review and request amendments to if anything's inaccurate or misleading. You can contact AJE directly by phone if you want to do an intake and talk to one of our staff or get some more direct assistance if you live in DC or if your child attends school in DC. And you can also visit our website, which has links to other trainings on other special education topics, audio webinars, and our Know Your Rights fact sheets, which hopefully will be helpful. And you can always contact us if you are looking for other resources for parents.
Thank you so much. I am a total nerd when it comes to like wanting to educate myself. So I will definitely tap in to the webinars that you mentioned on your website. And I think I'm prepared to go into my IEP meeting because of this session.
Great. Thank you, Lark. Much appreciated. And if you like this video, please consider supporting AJE and following us on social media. Come to our trainings, participate in our activities. We are currently recruiting parent leaders to join our Parent Leadership Academy, and we would love to hear any feedback that you have. So thanks for tuning in.